A Memphis manager thought he could skim money from Elvis for years. Then one day in 1957, the king said 6 words that ended everything. "I know what you've been doing." It was a Tuesday afternoon in March 1957, and Harold Morrison had just finished counting his take from Elvis Presley's latest concert tour. $15,000, skimmed carefully from merchandise sales, parking fees, and administrative costs that never actually existed. Harold smiled as he locked the cash in his office safe, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. Harold Morrison had been managing Elvis's business affairs in Memphis since early 1955, right when the young singer was starting to break big. He was a smooth-talking businessman in his late 40s, always dressed in expensive suits, always ready with a handshake and a smile. To everyone who knew him, Harold seemed like the perfect partner for a rising star, organized, connected, and most importantly, trustworthy. But Harold Morrison had a secret. For the past 2 years, he'd been systematically stealing from Elvis Presley, and he'd gotten very good at it. The scheme had started small. An extra $100 added to an equipment rental fee, a slightly inflated rate for a venue booking, small amounts that no one would notice, especially not a 22-year-old kid who was more interested in making music than reading contracts. Harold had reasoned that Elvis was making so much money he'd never miss a few thousand here and there. But as Elvis's fame grew, so did Harold's greed. By 1957, Harold was skimming an average of $20,000 per month from Elvis's earnings. He'd created fake invoices from non-existent companies, charged Elvis for services that were never provided, and pocketed the difference from every deal he negotiated. He'd even gone so far as to set up a separate bank account where he deposited his stolen funds, hidden under his wife's maiden name. Harold had convinced himself that he was untouchable. Elvis was too busy performing, recording, and dealing with his sudden fame to pay attention to the financial details. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, trusted Harold completely and rarely questioned the numbers. And Harold had been careful to always show Elvis that he was making money, just not as much as he should have been. What Harold didn't know was that someone had been watching, someone who understood numbers better than anyone gave her credit for. Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, had never trusted Harold Morrison. There was something about the way he smiled, the way he always had an explanation ready, the way he wore those expensive suits while claiming that management fees were cutting into profits. Gladys had grown up poor, and she knew the difference between honest work and smooth talk. For months, Gladys had been quietly collecting receipts, comparing Harold's reports to the actual ticket sales numbers she'd heard about, and asking questions of the venue owners and promoters she met. She didn't understand all the business terminology, but she understood when numbers didn't add up, and they definitely weren't adding up. On March 12, 1957, Gladys finally had enough evidence. She discovered that a venue in Mississippi had paid $30,000 for an Elvis concert, but Harold's report showed only $18,000. She'd found invoices for equipment rentals from a company that, according to the Memphis Business Registry, didn't exist. She'd tracked down a promoter who swore he'd paid Harold $50,000 in cash for a 3-show deal, but Harold's books showed only $35,000. Gladys took everything she'd gathered and presented it to her son. Elvis sat at the kitchen table in his modest Memphis home, going through page after page of his mother's careful documentation. His face remained expressionless, but those who knew him well could see the fury building behind his eyes. By the time he reached the last page, his jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might break. Elvis didn't say a word. He simply stood up, grabbed his car keys, and headed for the door. Gladys called after him, worried about what he might do, but Vernon put a hand on her shoulder. "Let him handle it," Vernon said quietly. "That boy's got a right to his anger." Harold Morrison was sitting in his office on Beale Street, feet up on his desk, smoking a cigar and reading the newspaper. It was his usual Tuesday afternoon routine. Count the money in the morning, relax in the afternoon, go home to his nice house in the evening. Life was good when you knew how to work the system. He heard footsteps in the hallway outside his office, but didn't bother to look up. His secretary had gone home early, and he wasn't expecting anyone. The footsteps got closer, then stopped. Harold finally glanced toward the door. Elvis Presley was standing in the doorway. Harold's first reaction was surprise, then pleasure. Elvis, what brings you by? I wasn't expecting. He started to stand, his salesman's smile automatically sliding into place. Sit down, Elvis said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but there was something in his tone that made Harold freeze. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, the kind of calm that makes smart people nervous. Harold sat back down, his smile flickering slightly. Is everything okay? Did something happen with the, I know what you've been doing? 6 words. That's all it took, 6 simple words, delivered in that same quiet, deadly calm voice, and Harold Morrison's entire world shattered like glass. The blood drained from Harold's face. His mouth opened, then closed. For once in his life, the smooth-talking businessman had absolutely nothing to say. He just sat there, staring at the young man in the doorway, and in that moment, he knew it was over. Elvis stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, looking at Harold with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. It was disappointment. It was betrayal. It was the look of someone who had trusted you and now realized what a mistake that had been. I trusted you, Elvis said, his voice still quiet, but now with an edge that could cut steel. My family trusted you. We believed you when you said you were looking out for us, that you were protecting my interests, that you were helping me build a career. Harold finally found his voice. Elvis, I can explain. There's been a misunderstanding. If you'll just let me show you the... Don't. Elvis's voice cracked like a whip. Don't insult me by lying to my face. I've got the receipts, Harold. I got the real numbers from the venues. I've got invoices from companies that don't exist. I know about the bank account under your wife's maiden name. I know everything. Harold's hands were shaking now. He gripped the arms of his chair, trying to steady himself, trying to think of a way out. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out for men like him. How much? Elvis asked. Harold looked up, confused. What? How much did you steal from me? Total. I want to hear you say it. Harold's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Elvis just stared at him, waiting. I don't know the exact... Take a guess, Elvis interrupted. Give me a number, Harold. You were good enough at counting it when you were putting it in your pocket. How much? Harold swallowed hard. His mind was racing, trying to calculate, trying to figure out if a partial confession would be better than a full one. But one look at Elvis's face told him that partial wasn't going to cut it. Maybe 80,000, Harold whispered. Over 2 years. Elvis didn't move. He just stood there, and somehow that stillness was more terrifying than if he'd started yelling or throwing things. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold it could have frozen fire. Try 230,000. That's what my mama figured out, and she only had access to some of the records. The real number's probably higher. Harold felt like he might throw up. $230,000. That was more than most people made in a lifetime. That was enough to buy houses, cars, security for an entire family. And he'd stolen it from a kid who'd grown up in a 2-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi. A kid whose family had known real poverty, real hunger, real struggle. I'm sorry, Harold said, and for the first time in his life, he actually meant it. Elvis, I'm so sorry. I'll pay it back. Every penny. I'll sell my house, my car, everything. Just, please. You're done, Elvis said simply. Done with me, done with managing anyone in Memphis, done in this business entirely. I'm going to make one phone call when I leave here. And by the end of the week, every musician, every venue owner, every promoter in the South is going to know what you did. You won't manage a church choir when I'm through with you. Harold felt panic rising in his chest. Elvis, please, I made a mistake. I have a family. I have a wife and kids. If you destroy my reputation, I'll have nothing. They'll have nothing. Elvis leaned forward, placing both hands on Harold's desk. When he spoke, his voice was soft but absolutely final. You should have thought about your family before you stole from mine. You should have thought about your reputation before you built it on lies. And you should have thought about having nothing before you took everything you could from someone who considered you a friend. He straightened up and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. He dropped it on Harold's desk. That's the contract you signed with me. It's terminated as of this moment. You've got 48 hours to clear out this office and settle your affairs. After that, I'm filing charges. You can spend that time getting your story straight for the police, or you can use it to run. I honestly don't care which you choose." Harold opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was the contract stamped with a legal termination notice and a letter from a Memphis attorney outlining potential criminal charges: embezzlement, fraud, theft by deception. The list went on and on. "That attorney?" Elvis said, pointing to the letterhead. "He's one of the best in Memphis. He's also my attorney now. You might want to get yourself one too." Elvis turned to leave, then paused at the door. For a moment, Harold thought he might say something else, might offer some kind of opportunity for redemption. But when Elvis looked back, his eyes were empty of any sympathy. "You know what the worst part is, Harold. I would have given you money if you'd needed it. If you'd come to me and said you were struggling, said your family needed help, I would have helped you. That's the kind of person I am. But you didn't ask. You just took. And now you've got to live with being a thief for the rest of your life." The door closed behind Elvis with a soft click, and Harold Morrison sat alone in his office, staring at the termination letter, knowing his life as he'd known it was over. Elvis kept his word. By the end of that week, everyone in the Memphis music scene knew what Harold Morrison had done. The story spread through Nashville, then to other cities where rock and roll was taking hold. Promoters who had worked with Harold found themselves questioned by other artists. Venues that had trusted him started auditing their own books. Harold tried to fight back at first. He claimed the numbers were wrong, that there had been misunderstandings, that Elvis's people were lying. But when the attorney Elvis had hired presented the evidence, real invoices versus fake ones, testimony from venue owners, bank records from Harold's secret account, Harold's protests fell apart like wet paper. Within 3 months, Harold Morrison's business had collapsed completely. His house went into foreclosure. His wife left him, taking the kids. Other clients sued him for fraud. The district attorney prosecuted him aggressively, and Harold served 18 months in prison. When he got out, he left Memphis and was never heard from in the music business again. The impact went far beyond Harold Morrison. The story became legendary in the music industry, sending a clear message. Elvis Presley wasn't a fool and wouldn't be taken advantage of. Other young artists started paying attention to their business affairs, asking questions, demanding audits. Elvis never talked publicly about Harold. He simply moved forward, hiring accountants and attorneys who reported directly to his family. Every contract was reviewed, every payment verified, every deal legitimate. Years later, a young musician asked Elvis for advice about choosing a manager. Elvis thought for a moment, then said, "Find someone you can trust, but verify everything anyway. Trust is earned over time, not given, because someone has a nice smile and a firm handshake. And if you catch someone stealing from you, don't give them a second chance. There are too many honest people in this world to waste your time on thieves." That advice spread throughout the industry. Harold Morrison's theft had an unexpected legacy. It made an entire generation of artists smarter about their business, more protective of their earnings, and less willing to be victims. And they all remember those 6 words. The 6 words that ended everything for a corrupt manager who thought he was too smart to get caught. "I know what you've been doing." Because in the end, that's all it took. Not threats, not violence, not a dramatic showdown. Just 6 words, delivered with absolute certainty by a young man who refused to be anyone's fool. Elvis Presley went on to become the king of rock and roll, one of the most successful entertainers in history. Harold Morrison became a footnote, a cautionary tale, a reminder that no amount of smooth talking can overcome the simple truth. And that truth is this: steal from the wrong person, and 6 words can end everything you've built. Choose your actions carefully, choose your words carefully, and most importantly, choose your integrity over your greed. Because in a confrontation between honesty and deception, honesty doesn't need to shout. It just needs to tell the truth.